Hey, Harold.
Hello.
Just the two of us?
So far, takes two to tango.
It's true. So we can tango, but we can't learn.
Do you know what page we're on?
Yes, I do. It is. Uh, looks like 133. Let's see what
Yeah.
Ariel wrote. 134.
Okay, close enough.
Hi, Henry.
Hello. Change my label to Chaim.
Chaim. Nice to see you,
I
Chaim.
use Zoom on work all the time. That's
Yeah,
why.
I know. I have the same issue. That's why I just put in my initial. Because it's Yaakov, it's Jacob, it's Jack. So I just put in J and I leave it uncertain and vague. When we're talking about Michael ben Versoy, I'm definitely Yaakov. Hey, Ernie.
Hi, everybody.
Ernie.
Hello from the other side of the table.
Saul is here too.
One 134.
I think we're on 134, right?
Yep.
Correct.
This concept of Michael ben Drusoy, who was Ben Drusoy was a ganef, like a highway robber. He was always on the move. So he ate his food pretty much raw, on the run. Michael ben Drusoy is a term given to food that has been only partially cooked, could be eaten as is only under duress. This category is named for Ben Drusoy, a known bandit, who in order to avoid getting caught was always on the run, ate his food before waiting for it to be completely cooked. The Rishonim debate how cooked the food must be to qualify as Michael ben Drusoy. According to Rashi, the standard is 1/3 cooked. Rashi in Shabbos there says ben Drusoy listim hayo mavashel bishul shlish, 1/3. The Rambam writes that food reaches the stage of Michael ben Drusoy when half cooked. Iniach basar gabi kecholim, if you left meat on coals from Erev Shabbos, im nitzlabo kegrogos, if a portion of the meat the size of a fig becomes roasted, afilu b'shnayim u'shlosh makomos, 2 or 3 places, chayiv. But this is a case where you actually put it on the coals on Shabbos. Now, lo nitzlabo kegroigros, if it had not been roasted the size of a fig, aval nizbashal kulo, chatzi bishul, if half of the meat was cooked, that's considered, you'd also be chayiv. Shulchan Aruch Harav rules that lechatchila, one should only leave food cooking normally if it's at least half cooked. But b'di'evet, one may do so as long as the food is at least 1/3 cooked. Meaning, we're talking about when you cooked it Erev Shabbos, you can continue leaving it to be cooked. If it's either lechatchila, you should try to get it half cooked, and if not half cooked, it should be b'di'evet 1/3 cooked. Shir Michael ben Drusoy Yeshomrim Shu Kamo Shlish. That's Rashi. Haroy l'cholodim Yeshomrim Shu Kamo Chatzi Bishul. Well, in halacha, Aval Bishul b'divrei Soifrim halach achra mekel. Even though this is a rabbinic law, and you go after a kula, mikol malkom mishum chomer Shabbos tzarich lizar lechatchila she's bashal chatzi bishulo. Mi bod yom. You have to have it half cooked already from Erev Shabbos. Im ein sham echad midarcha heter. If you don't have the other heterim to leave food like we went through last week. If it's been cooked a third, then you have all the heterim. Similarly, the Mishnah Berurah writes that a person who's following the lenient opinion of Chananya should be stringent to make sure the food is at least half cooked before Shabbos. Under duress, it's sufficient if the food is 1/3 cooked. The Mishnah Berurah, Yeshamim Chatzi Bishul, Yeshamim Shlish Bishul, Shulchan Aruch L'Kaman, B'Sivin Reish and Daled Sosam Chatzi Bishul. He said the stam halacha is half. U'makam atchak, in an emergency of shadi yesh lahakil, you can go to the 1/3. How do you assess this partial cooking? According to Chazon Ish, this is determined by the cooking time, while others disagree, as noted by the Piskei Teshuvos. Shiur Machal Bedrus, he says the shiur is machlokas im shlish bishul chatzi bishul, a third versus a half. U'misharin bizman bishul. The way we calculate it is how long it's cooked for. Kigon. In this bashal called tzorcha b'beis shos. Let's say the recipe calls for cooking it for 2 hours. So arboim doko is him shlish bishulo. Then if it cooks for 40 minutes, it's a third. V'nir she'ad tafshel magia li'ad soleves bo'enim min ha'cheshbon. We're not talking about the time that the dish reaches 113 or 114 degrees Yad Solevispo, it doesn't count in that period. You have to only start counting cooking once you've reached that temperature. Other people have other ways of measuring this. Sometimes the majority of the cooking takes place at the end. Could be that the first 40 minutes, that's not really a third. The way you do the calculation is, can you eat it if you were in sort of in an emergency situation? The Aruch Shabbos discusses the challenge in determining what is considered half-cooked. He suggests that calculating this upon the basis of time may not be enough. He therefore rules that one should define half-cooked based upon the nature of the food and the extent of the edibility rather than based upon time. Kazav Chazon Ish, Shir Zeh, Shal Machtis Bishul, Yev Shalano L'Sharu. We can't really ourselves figure out what's considered a third or a 50%. Ela B'Shir Zman HaBishul. I mean, there would be a way doing it by knowing what the full cooking time would be, and then you have a percentage of that. V'lo be'echos habushul, not the quality of the cooking. L'chein, b'chashvin is meshach hazman. We do a time. Mishah shatavshil shagabi ha'esh, higia l'chum sheyat soletzbo. We calculate from when the food has reached yat soletzbo to mishah zu matchel bishul, because it's only once the food has reached 120-degree temperature do we consider that cooking started. And we have to know, well, okay, how long does it take until it's fully cooked? Half of that time would be half the cooking. We need to study this subject more, says the Orchos Shabbos. The the food becomes softened really at the end. You could check the food at 50% time and the food is not soft. You wouldn't be able to eat it. With this concept that even at 50% time, the food's not edible, most people wouldn't eat it. We have to be stringent about this whole issue. So last week, and a little bit with this subject matter, we have discussed Shehiya. Shehiya is the concept of leaving food that you started cooking Erev Shabbos, and you leave it into Shabbos. We discussed that you should always have a groof of a ketuma, you have a blech. Sometimes it could be on the fire itself, depending on what it is. So Chazal forbade Shehiya out of concern that a person would violate Shabbos by stoking coals under a cooking food. Thus, they permitted leaving food cooking only if, first, the food is well cooked. That's according to Chachamim. Or has reached the stage of Michael ben Drusoy, according to the lenient opinion of Hananya. And we've just been through a discussion whether that's 33% or 50%, and the difficulty, in fact, of figuring that out. So that's one criteria. And if the food sits upon a stove, which is grufa, that the coals have been swept away, or ketuma, the coals have been smothered. How do we apply these principles to today's kitchen, in which we cook food using electric or gas appliances, not with coals? In this section, we will assess contemporary appliances in light of the opinions in the Gemara and the Rishonim cited above. So this will be a very halach lemaisa evening. What must a person do to render a gas flame grufa or ketum? Ostensibly, if the restrictions of Shehiya have been instituted to prevent the person from stoking the coals, one might say that covering only the knobs or control panel should be sufficient, as this will deter a person from turning up the fire. However, one could argue that Chazal decreed that one must adjust the fire itself, and any recognizable sign connected to the fire will have the same effect. The poskim, in fact, disagree about whether covering the gas stove is sufficient to allow someone to leave food cooking on it through the onset of Shabbos. And we will see 4 different opinions among contemporary poskim. Some evidence may be derived from a ruling of Shulchan Aruch regarding removing a pot and returning it, which is called chazara, which we will have the whole discussion of chazara in the next year. So in Orach Chaim Reish Nun Gimel, Hamashkim Baboker, V'ra Sheikdicha Tavshilo. He wakes up in the morning, he's left food cooking all night, and he sees that the food is burning. The Yar Penik Dechyot, it's going to get worse. Yachol Asir Ulaniach Kedera Yeshana Rekonis Al Pi Akira. He can take the pot off the fire. And he's going to put a used empty pot on the fire. The pot that you remove can be placed into that second pot. On this second, which is empty. You shouldn't put it on the ground. That while it remains hot. He wants you to use a used pot rather than a new pot, because the new pot, it would be make betashi. It would be finishing the new pot, which is an aver of make bepatish. Just as a stove must be gru for ketuma to permit shehiya, it must also be gru for ketuma to permit chazara. So here the Shulchan Aruch permits returning the pot to the stove that is covered with another empty pot. This implies that this kind of covering is sufficient to render the stove effectively gru for ketuma. Along these lines, Rav Moshe Feinstein notes that it is unusual to cover a stove with a blech when cooking. So, thus, the blech functions as a clear visual reminder that a person must not adjust the flame because it is Shabbos. Accordingly, Rav Moshe rules that it's sufficient to cover a gas stove with a metal blech, a sheet. However, Rav Moshe adds that it's also proper to cover the knobs of the stove, since the flame is raised or lowered specifically by the knobs. So this is in Igros Moshe Orach Chaim. Im kain bagaz shelo nimtza af echad shiva shel bekisui pach matchois. Nobody's going to primarily cook their food on a gas stove that has a blech on it. That's not how we normally cook. Mishum sheyach lagtina eish lagdilu b'tzimtzum k'fi shetzarich. when you have a gas stove and it's not covered with a metal sheet, you can raise and lower the flame just by turning the knobs. So lachein ein heker gadol mizeh. So laying a blech on a stovetop, there's no greater heker that is grufa ketuma umuter. Shebetanarei agaz ein mechasim lo'olam b'shvil bushul. When we're cooking in a normal cooking mode, we don't cover our flames. So yesh l'chalak l'hater v'lo meshlo yazeh b'chlala isser kiven sheyesh heker bara achrei she'ein b'zeh l'tzarcha bishul. Putting a blech is not l'tzarcha bishul. Everyone, he has no problem with this being a heter to be able to do either shehiya or chazara. Ulefizeh, afbalo kisui, gamal of ktoirim shal yada maktim magdilim. He thinks, even without covering the buttons, the blech alone would be a very strong siman. He says, I could have permitted, even without covering the buttons. The gam b'kisur la'esh levad hu eker gadol shein datu lachtos lagdil ha'esh yosher v'komer shnagim arbe. Some people don't bother covering the knobs, and he thinks that's fine. He says, ach yoter tov she'akisur shel pacha matchos yichas gam asaktor. He says, get a big enough metal sheet that besides it covering the gas flames, it covers the knobs as well. Kedei shaheker yeh gam b'makom. That's like when you stoke the coals. So that's the analogy is to the knobs, to malkotum, and the blech is the covering on the fire, like putting ash over the coals. Maybe he won't realize that there's a blech there, and he will turn it up. Even though it's sort of far-fetched to think he's going to do that. It's a visual cue. So he says it's better to cover the knobs as well. So this is doing two things to a stove on Shabbos. You decrease the heat, and you're covering the place where you raise or lower the coals. So maybe we should be stringent. Even though Rav Moshe started the discussion that perhaps you don't even need that, he says it's better to be machmir. He says, since you could have done it even without that, if you have an emergency and you don't have a covering of the knobs, it's also. Some people just used the blech on the fire. They didn't cover the controls. He says we shouldn't protest too strongly against them because he says that's logical. Rav Ben Zion Abba Shaul takes an opinion similar to that of Rav Moshe, according to which gruf and ketum are states that apply to the flame itself, and therefore one must cover the flame and not the knobs. But in contrast to Rav Moshe, he rules that there's no need to cover the knobs. You put a blech on a fire. You want to leave food cooking there. As kaftor gas, you have to cover the knobs. Or maybe just remove the knobs. He rules that you don't have to do anything to the knobs. But it's not enough to just cover or remove the knobs. You must put a blech on the fire. The Chazon Ish takes an opposing view. He holds that covering a gas stove is not sufficient to make it grufa uketuma. In his view, the Shulchan Aruch is not lenient because placing the empty pot is like covering the ashes. It's not like it's covering the ashes, but rather because it's like one is putting food near the fire, not directly upon it. The Chazon Ish argues that the Shulchan Aruch is referring to a case in which the upside-down pot provides not only a partition, but also a pocket of air. So what the Chazon Ish is saying that is the Shulchan Aruch, when he says you can put a pot, you sort of flip the pot upside down. And so you have an upside down pot on a flame, and then your food is put on top of that. Shehiya denog bar tzena kedosha. Chazon Ish gives the sort of the Israeli custom. Sheptila sa'esh lamata, the flame is below. Tachas ha'pitput v'shoif t'nakter lamala pitput. We put a pot, right, on a stand, and the fire is below the pot. V'esh tachas shulei akter dino kekira she'ena grufa. When it's just underneath those sticks, it's a fire that's not grufa. V'afil hamidim pach shel matechas. If you put a blech there, masimin akter b'toch hapach, mikol makom lo choshev kedin nosan kedei rikanis ala keira. That's not similar to putting an empty pot on a stovetop. La'afsik da'achalavi rak kekisas akir b'kisueh. It's not that it's covered by the metal. V'emin akter ala kisui. There's a choshev al gaba. Vilkach im notol ein machzirin b'Shabbos. Let's say he removes a pot from a flame and he has it still in his hand and his mind is to put it back. You don't do it. Unless you put a pot and then the second pot on top of that. That one you could remove and bring back. Like the Shulchan Aruch wrote.
But you could take it off once. You can't return it, but
You can return it
take
if
it off once.
According to Chazon Ish, if you have an overturned pot, you can return it.
But if you don't have an overturned pot, you could leave it there. But then, once you take it off, you just can't put it back. That's what it appears to be saying.
But that's the Chazon Ish. We're not.
That's the Chazon Ish.
We hold that you can. With Chazara, we're going to say you can put it back as long as it has a cover. As long as the blech, even our blechs will suffice for that. If you want to be machmer like the Chazon Ish, then you need a pot, not a blech. The Yalkut Yosef also rejects this chumrah of the Chazon Ish. He says it's enough. Ibdashan shampach, which is the blech, is best. I guess they use asbestos. I'm mafsikin ben aish l'kedera. V'chein plata chashmalit, or this electric plata that we use. Murtalitin sham be'erev Shabbos kam tafshel shrit chlis bashel. Food that's already begun to cook before Shabbos, you can leave it there. According to a third opinion, the primary restrictions of Shehiya surround control of the flame and not covering the flame at all. The Menucha Sava writes that since covering the buttons does indeed address this concern, one may rely on this view when there's no other option. We're talking about you have a flame on the stove. It's not covered, but you covered the buttons. According to Menucha Sava, you can leave a food that's been cooking Erev Shabbos, that's reached. If we're going to go to the lenient opinion like Hanania, which this Ramah seems to hold like that, you could leave it even on a low fire, as long as you cover the buttons. From strict law, it's enough to cover the buttons. No, you could either cover the fire with a blech. Just cover the buttons. Remove the buttons. Below the chazos is lavos without covering the fire. He says l'chatchila, if you have, that's the best way to do it. Rav Aaron Kotler, cited by Rav Shimon Eider, takes this opinion even further and rules that one need cover only the knobs, even l'chatchila. Shamati b'shem Rav Aaron Kotler, the b'tanurim didan with our fires, our ovens, ach the tov shegama eish yebim mechusach with blech. Even though it's good to cover the fire with the blech, the primary imperative is to cover the knobs. There are certain ovens, I guess, that you couldn't use the blech. A fourth opinion taken by Rav Moshe Stern, who was the Debrechiner, and Rav Shmuel Vosner, the Shevet HaLevi, is that one is obligated to cover both the fire and the knobs, which was really the opinion of Rav Moshe in the end. Rav Moshe gave an out that perhaps you don't have to protest for people who don't cover the knobs, but he also wanted you to have both. So in essence, we come back to Rav Moshe. Bevadai tzarech lechasis a plata shel tanur electri impach. So number one, an electric stove has to be covered with a blech. You can't leave cooking food from Erev Shabbos into Shabbos unless it's covered. Otherwise, you have no hecker and you're going to come to raise it. You can't leave food in the same manner that you leave food during the whole week. That's certainly forbidden. So you got to cover it. And then he says, you also need to cover the buttons. Remove it. You shouldn't move it. To raise it, even though there's a hecker, not to do that with the plata itself. It says it doesn't work unless you cover both. In practice, many authorities today follow the first approach requiring covering the fire, and many recommend covering the knobs as well, though many do not require it. While some side with some of the other approaches, and he gives you the sources of Shmer Shabbos, the Moral Shabbos, one should consult with one's rabbinic authority to verify one's personal practice. So far we've been talking about gas ovens. What about electric ovens? Electric ovens are also subject to the same halachic restrictions which apply to the other methods of cooking food on Shabbos and to these rabbinic prohibitions of Shehiya. However, using electric ovens involve additional complications. You have oven lights, thermostats, safety features. And these are even more pronounced in the more modern models. In the interest of appealing to Shabbat observant consumers, many manufacturers sell ovens which can be run in Shabbos mode with special functions that curtail major features that prevent use on Shabbos. These may include allowing the oven door to be open without turning on a light, disabling touchpad functions, cycling temperature control so it's not automatically immediately triggered when the door is open in others. In any case, the conscientious consumer should know that these features vary from one product to another, and these may impact how each oven might be used on Shabbos and Yom Tov. In the case of an oven running with its thermostat set, as in Shabbos mode, to operate at a given temperature and not to respond to the opening and closing of the oven door, some poskim rule that food may be left in it on Erev Shabbos because it's as though grufa ketuma. See the Tzitzat Eliezer, Rav Yosef Kapach, who write that since the flame remains steady, the Talmudic concern of stoking the coals where the flame was not steady is not relevant. See the Har Tzvi, who is leniently when there's no way to raise the temperature. Much like in the debate surrounding a burner, many poskim rule that it's insufficient to cover or disable the dials or buttons because grufa ketuma can describe only the state of the heat source itself. Thus, it would be problematic to leave raw food cooking inside an oven, as its heating coils often remain exposed. Even if the heating elements are found only underneath the oven surface and are covered, leaving raw food may still be problematic since this is the normal manner in which the oven is used, and it may not qualify as ketuma. What's more, one may mistakenly accelerate the cooking if one closes the oven door on Shabbos with food still inside. Accordingly, many contemporary poskim such as Shmir Shabbos Hilchos write that a person may leave food normally in an operating oven through the onset of Shabbos only if the food is fully cooked. Tanur gaz or chashmal, either a gas oven or electric oven, asher mutkan bo kaftor miyuchad lematzav Shabbos, where you have Shabbos mode, which basically is going to keep the food at a certain temperature based on a thermostat. Mutter lahashos besocho ochel amuvushal kol tzracho. If the food is fully cooked, then you could leave it in there. Me'erev Shabbos. The Yalkut Yosef rules that even an exposed flame or a flame underneath the oven is considered grufo ketum as long as the person is deterred from manipulating the fire. In his view, an oven in Shabbos mode may be considered grufo ketuma. Therefore, he permits placing food inside it if the food is sufficiently cooked. But further cooking will improve it. We're talking about, half, 50%. Or even for those who are strict in accordance with the Chachamim, fully cooked, but that further cooking will make it taste better.
Yeah. The 28 is an important footnote because it states that Rav Moshe agrees with the Shemer Shabbos Kilchasa, that if it's fully cooked, you can leave it.
Leave it in the...
Moment fully cooked to the Erev Shabbos.
Right. Similar approach taken Rav Moshe and Rav Yosef Sholem El Yoshev with the Shemir Shabbos, that if a food is fully cooked, Erev Shabbos, you can leave it in the oven for
On
Shabbos.
Shabbos mode. Which is what I was told by our Rav as well.
I remember, my mother, Alava Shalom, Alea Shalom. So her cholent was fully cooked. She would cook, they would cook cholent in a pot, not in there was no crock pots back then. It would be in a pot. It was fully cooked. But she would leave it in the oven like this. It was set. I don't know about the oven opening and closing the door, but they would leave it in that. In Europe at the shtetl, they would talk about leaving it at the baker, and then they would go at noontime and everybody would get their children from the baker. So
Many
maybe
yeshivas.
you have to be makpid not to open up the oven door. Remember, they
Many
opened it up and
yeshivas-
took the children down. Yeshivas, they did the same thing, right, Yaakov?
They leave the chunk on Erev Shabbos. It's cooked. They leave it in the oven. There's just no pot that's going to cover it. So they have like huge trays with the chunks in the trays.
But the oven was on.
The oven's on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember that was how I saw it. Then, of course, getting married. I remember there were newer appliances, the crock pots, etc., etc. But I remember the children being cooked in a pot. Oh, of course, in the yeshivas, there were all sorts of stories. The cat jumped into the chulin, and what's the din? That was always a famous story. Okay. Says the Yalkut Yosef, Tanur Chashmali, an electric oven, Hamufal Me'erev Shabbos, that is working from Erev Shabbos. V'yesh b'tocho guf chimum, it's got a set temperature. Apoel b'darkas chom kavua, hanikrav matzav Shabbos, shelo b'emtzaut termostat, yesh makilim la'ashos b'sochom erev Shabbos tavshel shpashel kotzochu. He says we are lenient to allow you to leave a dish that's been fully cooked in it into Shabbos. Even though as it cooks and cooks, it gets tastier and tastier. It's no problem. We're not concerned that he's going to increase the temperature. It's considered as if it's grufuk tumah. You have hot water, which is at 114 to 120 degrees, yatzoledispo. And now you want to leave it in there. You can leave it in there after it's boiled up. Or a dish that's going to get worse. Remember, we're using the leniency we learned last week of a raw piece of food, right? If you could leave already, even if it's completely raw, we know you're not going to come to stoke it. You're going to leave it in there overnight. Yesha machmirim b'tavshel mitzdak v'yafalo. He says there are people who are stringent regarding the food. If it gets better, l'chasus hakavtorim, to cover the knobs, or lishon bepitka Shabbos, or to put a note saying Shabbos l'simin v'heker shle'evolag b'yasachom atanu b'Shabbos. L'alacha nachon la'achmir lishon al gabi petek Shabbos. He says to write a note Shabbos. L'anichas a petek samach l'kavtorim. Put the note next to the buttons. Vaz muter latek shem gam tavshel shtak v'yafalo. Then you could leave in that oven a dish that gets better and better over time. Those that are lenient, leave without the paper. Many, especially Ashkenazim, adopt a more stringent approach to the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, according to which Shabbos mode is not sufficient to render an oven grufel ketuma. If so, then in order to allow food that has not been completely cooked to remain in the oven, one must cover the oven's heat source. Rav Moshe thus permits using an oven insert, such as a metal box on which to place the food. Rabbi Zion, Abba Shol, and others also allow using an oven for raw food, if practically one can cover the heat source with a metal sheet or the like. Says the Orlet Zion, Tanur Chashmali, Dino Kekir Shena Grufa. It's not considered if it's covered. Mutter Lashas Botav Shem Shabbos, Imichasa Bepach, you have to put a blech. Or B'niyar Kesef is Makarchon, you have to cover the source of the flame. But you can't open up the door. These solutions are not always so practical to implement. The Orchos Shabbos offers a different solution, according to which a person should immobilize the control. Although the heating element is left uncovered, it's permitted since any attempt to restore the knobs will involve significant effort, at which point one would remember not to do so on Shabbos. The problem is going to arise is when people haven't cooked their food completely and they want to leave it in the oven. So he says, put a tape on the button so that you wouldn't be able to turn the knob. If it's already cooked, Shabbos, that's according to Chananya. We paskin leniently. As long as there's no thermostat. But if you put it on Shabbos mode, where it's going to keep the same thing, it's important to emphasize that even according to most of the poskim, who do permit shehiya of uncooked food in an oven in the various ways described, any action that hastens the cooking constitutes the Shabbos Bishul. Thus, closing the oven door is you've committed the act of Bishul. The person must be careful not to open the door before the cooking is completed. The Yalkut Yosef writes that a person will be permitted to perform shehiya even in an oven without a Shabbos smoke. Taner Chashmali, Hapoal al Yadei thermostat, doesn't have a Shabbos smoke. There are lenient people. If the food's been fully cooked, even though the food gets better, and you can open up the door, you should put a sign that says Shabbos. You can close the door. You don't have to put an object to prevent the door from closing completely. If the dish in the oven on Erev Shabbos is not fully cooked, you wouldn't be able to close it on Shabbos. Taner Afiyah, Shegufa Chimu Mislait Miyad Imsichas Del Datanu. These are kind of ovens where it starts heating up the moment you open the door. Asur Lashas B'Sochel Tavshel Erev Shabbos. Because You wouldn't be able to put food in there because you wouldn't be able to open it on Shabbos or Shabbos to take it out. But Fiza Lechura, who adin kam in Didon Didan Sha'af Shal Yidei Psichos Delas Ataner Nichlas Toch Ataner Avri Mechal Lacheder. So, how are we going to open up? In our case, where he said it's permitted, you're going to open it up, and air is going to come in. Now there's a thermostat running, so cooler air is going to come in. That's going to hagar and lafalas ataner. That's going to cause the oven to start working. It's you're not having kavana for it to go on, and it's something you don't care about. You don't really want air to go in to make it cooler.
It's actually the lo nichale. It's more than the lo ichbatle. He doesn't want
it. He doesn't want vataner lo yifa mechadash. And also because it saves him money on the cost of electricity. Yes, it's certainly, I would say it goes beyond ichbesle, it goes to nichale.
right?
Uma'achavahu grama. So there's an indirect causation going on. Sharei b'shashu potechat hadelet, when he opens the oven door, akati ena or nidlak alidei psicha. It's not direct that the fire is turned on. Elashal yedei psicha sadel snichnas avir kal. There's some air that comes in, litaner, and that is the indirect action that is goyrim al yedei zeh litnuata termustat. Udlat lakasaton, and then the tanner turns on. Ubana bezel machlokas aposkim im grama sur b'Shabbos kam b'lachos t'Rabbanan. Do we have a heter of grama or not when it comes to rabbinic mlochas? The Gemara Shabbos muvor the lekach chiyuva b'grama b'Shabbos. In Shabbos, the Gemara says there's no chiyuv for grama. Umarana Beis Yosef kosa b'shem tshuva Ashkenazis lahatir grama b'Rabbanan, and allowed you to do lechatchila, I guess, things midrabanan l'das amaram udavka b'mokum hefsed, only monetary loss. After natina ledina, even though la halacha she'en la'akel b'grama Shabbos, we shouldn't be lenient regarding this. Because mokum yesh lamer dechol zeh b'ma'aseh b'yadayim. That's if you're doing something active that causes an indirect action. But psik reisha is something that you have no kavanah for. What do I mean by an action? There used to be something called a gramophone for doctors on Shabbos. It was a phone, but it didn't generate, when you press the button directly, you'd close the circuit. It caused something else to turn, and then that closed the circuit. But that already is an active act. That's what he's saying. But by here, the opening the door that's not an active act. That's a psik reisha, because he has no kavanah to want that to happen. The story coming from Gam Yeshut surface as far as Oimrim Shil'in Chibur Azerem Shalachash Lavirak Grama. There are also shittas electricity that say that when you complete an electric circuit, it's also just a grama. So according to Yalkut Yosef, using grama and psik reisha serve as a basis for permitting one to open the door of an oven, even when the thermostat is working. Most poskim disagree. Thus, the Shmir Shabbos K'chosa permits opening the door only when the oven is actively heating, because it's already heating already. In which case, the oven is not activated by opening the door. And if the food remains inside the oven, it would be permitted to close the door only if the food is fully cooked. Ulam, Tamnur Chashmali, Hamufal Yedei Veset Chom thermostat. That he allows. You can only open the oven door. I guess you hear, you see that the oven is operating now. And therefore, by opening the door of the oven, it's not going to cause anything. There's not going to be any action with opening the oven. Now, let's say there's food in there. Now, by closing, you could be adding to the cooking. So, im yesh betaner ochel shadayin lo tafshel kol tzarcho. If there's food in there that hasn't been fully cooked, or by closing the door, it's going to cause some electricity to go on. So although as we have seen, opening and closing the oven door may be permitted in many cases in principle, some ovens have a safety feature which disables heating elements whenever the oven door is open to prevent someone from being burnt when reaching into the oven. In that case, opening the oven always extinguishes the heat immediately. Closing it triggers the heating element to reignite. So that kind of oven would be forbidden to open or close the door of such ovens without a Shabbos mode. The Star K also notes that removing fully cooked food from an oven on Shabbos may involve a number of complications. May I open?
This
Oh.
chapter is entitled electric ovens. What about gas ovens? I, for example, have a gas oven with a Shabbos mode. Why should that make any difference?
I don't think it
Does
would.
it? I don't think it does, but they entitled the chapter electric ovens. It's not only
Yeah,
electric.
but it's not only electric.
Yeah.
Talked
But
about
if you look at the beginning, it says electric ovens. Page 141. It's the same as gas.
Yeah, but it would be the same.
And they should just say ovens. That's my note.
I called because I want to find out what.
I'm not sure if gas oven and electric oven are the same, you know?
No, but the principles we've been talking about here is why would it not be the same? If the oven works with a thermostat, whether it's gas or electric, turns it on, right? It has a thermometer. It sets it at 350, and if it gets lower, it turns on. If it gets hotter, it turns off. That's a thermostat.
My
That
gas
works with a
oven
gas oven as well, right, Yaakov?
yeah, it has a Shabbos mode, my gas oven. So, you turn on the Shabbos mode, you can't, the controls won't,
Temperature will never change.
No.
it won't change.
But yeah, but
And no
Shabbos
lights
mode,
go on.
when you turn on the Shabbos mode, I think it only gets to 220 degrees. It's not more than that.
170. 170.
I just called them this week. The temperature inside the oven on the Shabbos mode is 170.
Right. It's the same as a warming drawer.
And you
No,
can-
warming drawer is 140. It's not 170.
You sure?
Yeah, warming drawer is not as hot. We'll see. Warming drawers are very complicated. We'll get to warming drawers. I
And you can hear the
believe.
gas come on, so you know when you open the door, you're not triggering it. You can hear the gas coming on and off and on and off.
Right. So we just said that you
Right.
should open the door when you hear the gas is on.
Right, and you can hear it, it's obvious.
So this is the Star K. First, one must be sure that opening the oven door does not automatically cause a light, icon, or electrical switch or flame to go on or off. In the case of convection ovens, opening the door may cause the circulating fan to go off. Even though these actions are not intended, they are prohibited, as if there was intent, since this is an automatic consequence, like a psik ratio. If opening the oven door does not automatically set off an electrical reaction, then one may do so in order to remove food on Shabbos, provided that all the food is removed at that time. Often the door will have a plunger switch that turns on lights or icons as the door is opened. If this plunger switch is disabled, it may prevent any prohibited reactions from taking place. Some Star K Sabbath mode ovens have a feature to disable icons, lights, or signals so that the oven door may be opened on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It should be noted that the commercial appliance industry is subject to ever-changing technological advancements and changes in popular design, as well as endless variations from one model to the next. Thus, it's necessary to know how a specific oven functions before attempting to apply a halachic ruling, especially from an outdated source, to allow use of an oven on Shabbos. They give you a list on the bottom here.
Yeah, and it's not the only, Stark is not the only organization. They're probably the most prominent one, but other organizations also, provide Shabbos mode certification. I have a GE that is not certified by the Stark, it's certified by somebody else. I don't know.
OU does.
It could be the OU. Yeah, I think it's the OU. But once you put it in Shabbos mode, no controls work, and the lights don't go on and off. There's just nothing you can do.
It doesn't go off.
let's try to finish Shehiya today. Let's go to electric hot plates. We have seen that the poskim debate under which conditions an oven might be considered grufa. By contrast, most poskim rule that a non-adjustable hot plate or warming tray, plata, is considered grufa ketuma as by definition, there could be no concern that a person might manipulate the fire to control the heat, and most individuals do not use it for primary cooking. Accordingly, as the Shmir Shabbos Hilchos writes, it would be permitted to leave food on such an appliance through the onset of Shabbos, regardless of the degree to which the food is cooked. Lulam plata chashmalit hamiyuchedet l'Shabbos, hamiyuchedet lishmor al chom ha'meichel shaleh, that is meant to keep food warm. Ein regilim levasher led, it's not practiced to cook on it. Gam yivshar lagdus midas achonshri, you can't increase the heat. Ein it te'una kisui, not doesn't require something on top of it. Muter lashas alav oichel me'erev Shabbos, you can leave food on the plata from erev Shabbos. Shomati magon Shlomo Zalman, v'nimiko imon, and he has a good argument. The possess shemayim erev Shabbos like al plata kazos. The fact that you're putting a pot from erev Shabbos onto that plata, harei ze choshev kektuma. It's considered ketuma. V'gam lo shechatam shel shema yechta. You're not stoking. Kivin sheina plata midas bishul. The whole plata is not meant for cooking. V'gam iev shel hagdilas midas achonshli. You can't increase the heat. It's like straw or rakings, where on Shabbos you remove a pot from such a thing, you can put it back. The Yalkut Yosef says the same thing. You don't need to put any separation between the plata and the pot. No distinction between how much it's been cooked. However, the Orchos Shabbos records the stringent view of Rav Elyashiv, where you have to cover the hot plate with foil. I guess my wife must have known this Rav Elyashiv, because our hot plate is always covered with foil. Plata chashmalit hamichalet l'Shabbos asher ein ba dargot shonot shel chon. Dina kegrufa ketuma muter la'ashois al gaba tavshilim erev Shabbos. That's the heter. V'yesh machmir matzrich l'chasos b'niyar aluminum. Some are machmir.
Tell your wife about note 40.
Those who follow this opinion should ensure that one's foil cover does not create extreme heat due to the hot plate, which could pose a safety concern. Wow. So Rav Elyashiv, the Talmud Kivin Shein Kan Heker v'Chatzitza Lo Polig Rabbanan. That means there's no heker and separation, so there's a low plug. It's a heat source, like any other heat source. The Chacham are going to need you to make a separation, like with all heat sources. Aluminum. Look at the Chazon Ish. So the kisui pach ein a moya la soisa grufa ketuma. Because the metal, but Chazon Ish didn't think aluminum foil would be good enough, because it doesn't cause. Remember, we said you need a full pot. We will conclude by mentioning again that ideally one's food should be fully cooked before Shabbos, and one should use a heat source that is covered to keep the food warm, which will prevent many complications related to Shehiya. However, as we have seen, there are numerous options for those who are unable to do this. One may certainly rely on the more accepted ones when necessary, provided one is aware of the various guidelines involved. The machshava concept, before we leave, Rav Shimon Pincus.
Hold on a second, Ernie. I just want to ask you about a hot plate. If your food is fully cooked, right, and it's just to warm it up, or your food is fully cooked, your soup is completely boiled, but you just put it on the hot plate. Why would you need an aluminum
You don't need it. You don't need it. You see, the Shmir Shabbos, Rav Shlomo Zalman, you could put it directly on the hot plate. The Rav Elyashiv said that you needed it because it's no heker, and there's a low plug. That was his svara. That since it's a heat source, the Rabbanim are not going to. They're going to say cover all heat sources.
But a lot of these hot plates have a knob that you can make it a little bit warmer and a little cooler. And this thing over here, the hot plate they're talking about over here has no does not have different levels of heat, but there
You'd have
is.
to cover, so you'd have to cover you'd have to cover the kaftor, take it off.
Chaim, I've never seen a hot plate that has different heat. I haven't seen one, but okay, maybe you're right.
Ours,
I have one.
ours you just plug in. I don't.
All
I don't
Ours also you
all over
just plug
Amazon.
in.
It has a control on it, but
They're all over Amazon.
like the crock pot, you take the knob off, same thing.
Okay, well, you'd have to do that. If they said they were dealing with hot plates that had no knobs. If you had a knob, you'd have to cover that or take it off. So the Rav of Hakim, he wrote Shabbos Malkasa about using Shabbos to develop one's emunah. Ikar mitzvahs amichadasu Shabbos hi emunah. The primary mitzvahs for Shabbos is faith. Haynu zachor seyom Shabbos lizkor v'lasim level mitziut Shabbos. We should understand what Shabbos is. What does it teach us? Shederech Shabbos ro'imus Hashem yisbarach v'yichudo. Through Shabbos, we see what Hashem is and His unity, or His singularity, His uniqueness. Shabbos, bitachon, and you have to have trust in Hashem. You don't do any work. We give our parnasa to Hashem. You don't go out and plow your field. Tomorrow's going to rain. It's going to ruin your whole crops for the whole year. You can't do anything about it. It's a very hot day, and your garden is thirsty. And he sits around, doesn't do anything. Baruch Hu will take care of it. His hishtadlus eina mo'ila. You live in absolute truth. From HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything is the same. Whether he works, doesn't work. Actually, it's the same operating principle in both worlds. So, a person who lives practically with this kind of emunah, he basically relies on Kodesh Baruch Hu, and he's mevatel this world called Sarosov Varpkosov Kandelesa. He has no problems, no tribulations, Kol Chatov Neshav Kandelesa. He has no sins. It's as if they're the tzaddikim in Olam Haba sitting and benefiting from Hashem. According to Rav Pinkus, not working on Shabbos demonstrate one's faith that Hashem controls our sustenance and will care for us even when we observe His command, do not work for our livelihood. Based on this idea, we can better appreciate an idea discussed by Rav Pinkus. In L'Chadodi, Rav Shlomo Al-Kabetz declares that Shabbos is the source for all blessing. Likrat Shabbos l'chu v'nelcha ki makor bracha. We say that Shabbos is the source of all blessing. Rav Pinkus explains that Shabbos is truly considered the makor bracha for the rest of the week, and all the material benefits in this world during the rest of the week are received through the special part of Shabbos. Ulejaz Shabbos nikretz makor bracha, v'dover kupshuta mamish, k'adam shnovelo mayan be'emtza ginato, like a person has a spring in the middle of his garden, misham doilo mashka l'chol hagina, and it irrigates everything in his garden. Kach amida Kodesh Baruch Hu is Shabbos. Kodesh Baruch Hu is the well. Lios mayan u'makor brachos l'chol shofar bracha chayim u'kedusha bo'olam. And from Shabbos pours out all the blessing, the life, the kedusha. Shebiyom hashvim ismala olam b'chol chayusu l'krashesh hayomim she'yavo. And it feeds the other 6 days with what it needs. Kol ma shetimtza achar kach mikoach Shabbos u'ninsa. Avol be'emes Shabbos eina makor l'shum davar. Kodesh Baruch Hu makor. Umau im kein in Shabbos shebiyom zeh yotzes l'pol shlita Kodesh Baruch Hu. And with Shabbos, we really see the governance of Kodesh Baruch Hu. B'Shabbat atzma ma yashar shedarko balang t'rsenis Baruch Hu tochel ameinu. So the Shabbos is the gateway through which His Holiness comes into our world. Although some might think that success in business or other matters come despite one's not working on Shabbos, the reality is precisely the opposite. Our material success in this world is nurtured by proper Shabbos observance and the recognition of the true source of our wealth and possession. Okay. Next week we will do Chazara, which will complete. We had Shehiya, and we'll have Chazara, and then we'll have Atmana, I think.
I just want to note.
Yeah,
that,
come on.
The crock pot issue is discussed next in further eon on page 158. We've talked about a crock pot, and I guess that's where it's discussed.
Okay, I think we'll do that.
Yeah,
Do
makes
that as
sense.
part of this year next week.
Yeah.
We'll do it inside together.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Kaya.
Okay, everybody have a
Be
great,
well.
great
Well
week.
too.
Yeah, good stuff. Right.
Take care. Yeah, very good.